You are now in the realm of enlightenment and transformation.
Welcome to Chief Speaks.
All music performed and produced by Yuya.
Enlightenment comes from allowing yourself to journey through the dark shadow of death, the primordial abyss of wisdom's waters. For it is the treasures and mysteries that lie waiting in the dark that transform us and propel us to a new enlightened state. One should never aspire to live in the light nor the dark, but should journey between the two in order to evolve the overall reality into a self-actualized creation. Knowledge is your light, as wisdom is your darkness. The bold interplay of the two in your life leads you to an enlightened understanding of yourself and the inner verse you've created. Male is your enlightenment, female is your transformation, child is your evolution. Woman, accept the light into your darkness, so it may enlighten you. Man, go bring your light boldly into the darkness, so that it may transform you. Enlightenment and transformation.
I love you so much because you just don't know what you've just done for me. Thank you so much.
Wow. This is like the best call I've had in ages on BTR.
So this show was meant for me to be able to hear today, and I'm so thankful.
That's his home.
Therefore, now a new pathway has now been cut in order to get to the Almighty, where there may not have been one. So the communication with them, if they have enough power and strength to talk to us, the communication will be very
clear. That's one of the reasons I don't get into the current events thing too much, because it starts to become a perpetual alarm clock that we just keep hitting snooze on. I speak to the ascended masters, quote unquote. I talk about spiritual stuff, but I also speak about some very practical, we can do today things.
Be as natural as you can be with your spiritual. You can't always go by your feelings, because your feelings are corrupted. Your feelings are just as corrupted as everything else, your chakras and everything else. You got to know what's beyond you, and that's why we have elders. We can't do everything. You can't get everything out of books or weekend certification. You can have the most powerful, ancient, oldest, most, as far as you know, truthful tradition in your hands. And if you still have a dirty spirit, you're not going to get anything out of it. You're not going to learn anything. You're not actually going to grow. I try to teach in a way where I make myself obsolete. That's always been my goal, to make myself obsolete.
I really wanted to, kind of big you up. I think you're awesome.
There's a lot of elders out here right now that want to know what's going on. They're not getting on Twitter and stuff like that, but they want to be up on the new stuff. Sit down and have some conversations with them. It's not always about hearing their story. It's also about being news reporters for them and letting them know, like, yeah, this is what's happening right now. They may tell you something about what happened in Charleston that you couldn't even. Your spirituality has to create sane spiritual family. Okay, and that family exists first inside of you. You have to express the different expressions of that rainbow coalition of spirits inside of you first. Okay, don't let communities hijack that rainbow. See, the problem is when we come into the conscious community, the dudes are doing the same thing that the women are doing.
I just want to say that I really enjoy your show every Sunday, and my friend and I call it going to church. When we call in, we'll be like, you going to church? And I'm like, where have y'all been at?
God cannot go against its own truth. So anytime you have an inkling that God is going against its own truth, then God is no longer behaving as God. So therefore, the spiritual community doesn't recognize God. You dig where I'm coming from? Or can we have a new thought? Can we step outside of the books for a second and have a new conversation about hair weaves and wigs? Can we have a new conversation about homosexuality? Can we have a new conversation about vegan eating? We doing right. It's a good day for exorcism.
347-945-7680. Call in and let's build. Greetings. Welcome to another segment of Chief Speaks on Enlightenment and Transformation TV, as well as Enlightenment and Transformation on Blog Talk Radio, occasionally High Frequency Radio, and iTunes. Very importantly, iTunes. I know a lot of you tune in from the iTunes channel, which I think is of the same name, or maybe it may carry the old name, Ancient Indigenous Sciences Today. Either way, you're listening to Chief Speaks, and I want to welcome you. As you know, for some of you, this month we're dealing with the subject of how to live in our new life and I'm going to say how to live an Anu/African life. African, AFRAKAN. So we're in our second segment of this series, and we know in the last segment we dealt with a few different concepts, of one of which being homosexuality, the other being some of the tenets to community building, and a few other pieces that we were able to get into. I urge you, if you have not checked out that segment, to definitely go back into the archives and check it out. It's on YouTube and it's in Blog Talk as well, which means it's also in iTunes. So I urge you to, check those segments out, get caught up. If you haven't even been following our monthly themes for the insights since the beginning of the year, I urge you to go back to January's segment and come forward, with the progression, because again, there's a methodical movement to all of this. So in this segment, we're going to be dealing with a similar subject, same subject really, how to live in our new life, but we're going to hit it from just different angles. And one of the reasons why I'm also dealing with some of the information on the outskirts is because I'm currently working on another book. I'm actually working on a couple books at the same time, which is why they're all moving so slowly. A couple books and a few more classes we have coming. But, springtime, stuff has to come to the surface. So based on that, I know the book will go into more detail in terms of our point plan of how we calculate our different scenarios and situations and figure out the best possible solution, which is the truth. As I spoke about in recent shows, the truth is nothing but the best answer. And that answer changes as time goes on, which is something we'll kind of be touching on a bit in this segment. But what I wanted to do first was I wanted to answer an email that came in. Well, not even an email, it was a twit, I guess DM, they call them, or direct twit, or, and again, I'm slow on the social media piece. You guys know I don't do much on them. Just recently, I'd say maybe the past 2 strongs, I decided to try to give it the old college try again. So I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter a bit more now. And I'm going through all of the messages that I've been receiving over time that went unanswered. So this is actually one from July of last year, July of 2015. So yeah, brother, I apologize. I wasn't brushing you off, but I actually was not even using the account directly like that, aside from putting information about the shows and classes and things like that. So I'm on them now, though. I'm using them. I'm responding to people. I'm talking when I can. It's very difficult because my schedule is wilder than you could imagine. I had to explain that to someone recently. They thought that all I did, well, maybe they kind of thought all I did was just the shows and readings, but like I explained, the shows, the readings, and the classes account for like 1/10 of what I knew is actually doing right now. So this is all the smallest part, just as necessary, but definitely not primary, so sometimes getting back to people and things like that, that's why we have a customer service staff. Getting back to you guys takes me a little bit of time, but trust me, I'm not ignoring you. So again, but this one was like July of last year. That was pretty bad, so again, my apologies go out. And I did let him know that I would answer it in this segment. So this is the question that he asked, and I have his username. I don't want to say that, so I'm just going to say from brother NC. We'll try that. Maybe you'll know, from there. But he says, what's up, my good brother, comma, nice, thank you. I wanted to ask what your thoughts or opinion is on the topic of people that go missing in national forest. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that again. He said, what's up, my good brother, comma, I wanted to ask what your thoughts or your opinion is on the topic of people that go missing in national forest. All right, so I said another reason why I was like, I'll answer it on the show, because I usually don't answer stuff like this too much. You guys know I pretty much stay away from the conspiracy theory type information. So put this phone away. So with that, I usually don't touch these topics too much, but I thought it was a good question, and I think it relates even to what we're speaking about in terms of living in our new life. So he's asking my opinion on people going missing in national forests, which is a real phenomenon. It's not, I can't even say it's a conspiracy theory at this point. Some things in this day and time, we have to stop trying to interpret, and we have to stop trying to theorize, because they're right there in your face. Like, it's blatant. And we use theories and interpretations in order not to do anything. So we'll say, oh, that's your interpretation. That's how you feel. That's your opinion. Some things are just right in your face. Like, if we were to say, okay, throughout the country are, law enforcement, policy agents or policing agents, are they brutalizing and profiling blacks and Latinos? Well, we could say, we could have different opinions on it, but some things they're in our face now. Yes, yeah, they are. Now we can conceptualize as to why and interpret different reasons, but the action is plain and bold. So the same thing with people going missing in the national forest. Yeah, that's a real thing. And I don't think we've ever discussed that before. It's just not kind of our line or school of training that we tend to discuss, but I'll share my take on it. I'm not one who's researched it in great depth, but I will share my perspective. One of the first things I think is very interesting about people who go missing, and this has been happening since the 50s, people being found, missing in national forests. I remember reading about a case in 1956. It was a young man, he was with his uncle, I believe, and he was with his dog. His dog was named Lassie, actually, and they were playing by a lake, and it's basically a long story, but his uncle turned his back for a second, and they were gone for days, and then they put on like this massive manhunt. It was like 300-400 people combing the woods and could not find this kid. And he turned up, I think it was like 6 days later, in a stream, face down in a creek, actually, that was like 14 miles from where he actually was missing. Young kid, so the phenomenon is real. It's definitely real, and it's been happening for a very long time. But there's a couple of pieces to it that you'll see that are very constant with it. One is that often, I won't say typically, but often the youth that go missing, because a lot of times it happens to children. The children that go missing are usually mentally or physically handicapped. Okay, that's number one. Number two, they often go missing with their dogs. Okay, two very common scenarios when you profile the different cases that have occurred. They go missing with their dogs, and they usually, and what's interesting about this phenomenon is that a lot of times when they go missing in national forests, they actually do turn up later. It's not like other kidnappings on the street where they're just gone. This national forest thing is weird in that they actually do end up turning up. A large amount of them turn up later, alive. So one of the phenomenons, again, to look at is how far they travel from their place of either wandering or abduction. There was a case some years back where there was a 2-year-old, right? And this 2-year-old went missing. And again, it's always a situation where the parent turns their back for a second. Matter of fact, I think they were playing, no, this wasn't a 2-year-old. This was the 7-year-old. They were playing a game of Explorer, and it was like a hide and seek type game. And the parent was watching, and one of the children hid behind a bush, right? But she could see, no, it was a he, I'm sorry. He could see they're right there behind the bush, right? So after the game, nobody was found, all the kids came and they converged, except for this one. So he walks over there, child is gone. But he was right there, And they searched for days on top of days and did not find this child. The child turned up somewhere on top of a mountain, somewhere, face down again. So what you'll find is, which is a constant with that particular phenomenon, is that the children leave very quickly, and they're found miles and miles and miles away from where they would be. There was an instance once where they had a 2-year-old who was found 7 miles from their point of where they were missing, and it was up a hill, like a steep hill. Now you think about the average 2-year-old. How far can that? I mean, you get some 2-year-olds who can barely make it up steps, but how far is an average 2-year-old really going to travel through the woods where they're going over logs and bushes and thorns and things like that? And they're scared, they may be cold, to be found 7 miles from where they were with no real recollection of what actually happened. And they're recalling things that maybe are just so vague or were impossible. I think one time there was an instance with one child, a similar type thing, and they said, well, where were you all this time? This was one that they found in a creek. And he said, I was running from the helicopters, but there were no helicopters. But he saw lights in the sky. So my opinion on it is that I think there's a couple of things going on. I think we can't lump every abduction into one type of scenario. Sometimes in those woods, you just have perverts. And those perverts just wait and they prey on families. They kidnap the whole family, or they kidnap the children. When they're done with them, they put them back. Okay, that's one scenario. Then you have you have kidnappings that have been documented by the Vatican's pedophilia cults. So they kidnap children and do what they do with them, do their rituals and perform pedophilic acts on them. So you have that scenario. But some of these are so mystical that there's something else happening. One of the phenomena that they found often too is that a lot of times when they find the children, their shoes are missing. Now, if you think about that, traveling extremely long distances with no shoes in the cold, oftentimes because it's cold. And who has the highest rate of missing people and children is Yosemite Park. That's like the largest grouping of people who've gone missing, Yosemite. So they often find people without their shoes, and they find people very often too half dead, laying face down. Now, if you think about it, even in terms of passing out or falling out, face down is not a common position that someone would lay. Like if their face is just in the ground. They may fall to the side, they may fall backwards, but they always find them the same way, no shoes, face down. There's something to that we should pay attention to. My personal perspective on it, with some of them, is that I think these children are being taken into the underworld. That's my perspective. Because another common phenomenon they found about it, as well, is that once the children are taken, that the weather patterns change immediately. They always find that as soon as the child goes missing, they'll get a snowstorm or a rainstorm, which also makes it more difficult for them to track the child. So that's a significant coincidence. And then you also have the shoes being taken off. Some years ago, I think it was in I can't remember the country. I'm so horrible with maps. But they had these, it could have been like Switzerland or Netherlands, but they had these instances of shoes, these huge abundance of shoes washing up on the shores. And not only were there shoes, but some of them had feet inside of them, human feet, So when I looked at that in terms of years ago, when I looked at in terms of the abductions, the main thing I thought about was the filth of the earth. So if I was going into the Duat or into the underworld, I wouldn't really need my feet, because feet are something that we utilize to transmit our purpose and our meaning and our efforts across the planet, across the earth, right? We use our feet, we walk. And once you walk, the walking is what makes you conscious of your worldly environment. It's walking. Walking is so critical in that sense. That's why when you look at images often of Osiris figures. They're on the throne. They're not walking like our Teddy Pendergrasses or our I got a big picture of them right over there, and Curtis Mayfield's, right? They're in the wheelchair or in the throne, representing that Osirian throne. They're not walking. They're not going through the dirt of transformation or the corruption of transformation. They're staying clean from that. Even the Obatala aspect, staying clean from that transformation. So, and you think about the feet as well. When you think about a body, it's your mouth and your feet that are the most filthy. They contain a lot of bacteria, So my personal opinion is I think some of the youth are traveling through the underworld, because you remember the forest in our tradition has always represented the underworld or heaven, but heaven and the underworld were always the same state of being. Just like when you consider yourself a human or living on a planet, that's only a state of consciousness. It's, you're conscious of your material reality, your consciousness of the 3D reality, you're conscious of the world, but that consciousness can be shifted to different places. If I become consciousness of Emi or air or wind, in that instance, in that moment, I become a part of that reality. I can become an air dweller. If I become conscious of the sun, I can become a sun dweller. So we travel through different places through the shifting of our consciousness. So because many of us are very three-dimensional conscious, then we feel like, well, this is the world that we live in, this and no other world, right? So what I've seen, and then when you look at the canine, that they're often these children, they go missing with their dogs, which doesn't really make sense, because if you send a search party out and a child has a dog with them and you're calling and you're flashing lights and you're walking, you have other dogs barking, because a lot of times they send bloodhounds, that dog is going to make noise. The dog's not going to know to be quiet. So somehow when these abductions happen, child and canine go into another state of consciousness. And then when they find them miles and miles and miles away, often with no shoes, face down on the ground. And again, I'm not discounting the perverted mountain men that may just be kidnapping families and children to have sex with them. But we have so many documented instances where they were just taken and then they just came back. And some of the experiences that they spoke about having were not happening at that time. You had one instance, I think the child was 5 or 6, where they went missing and it was a snowstorm afterwards, and they were again found with no shoes. Hypothermia did not even set in. That didn't make sense. Now we could say, okay, maybe somebody took them in and held them for over the, throughout the period of the storm, but there was no recollection of that in the child's mind, that they were held and somebody fed them and took care of them. And I think they were lost for like 7 days, So, I think sometimes we forget that where these great nature reserves and forests are established are high points. Most of the time they're established, around ley lines. Okay, so there's a lot of electromagnetic material, electromagnetic activity. But then outside of that, often they're established in places where there were once great spiritual meetings. Like, you have the Great Plains, and even in New York we have White Plains, right? These were areas where all the different nations would meet. And they would meet and they would converge. I'm talking about the First Nation groups. I know a lot of times we call them tribes, but it's not always as appropriate. Tribe was a name given to them because it was short for tribulation. They were considered to be people who suffered. So they would say, oh, look at the tribes, so those who are suffering. So we need to give them Christianity and blankets, to help them out. So they were nations. So these nations would converge and meet in these certain spaces. And these became later holy lands and sacred lands. And these reserves are built around that. So there's still a lot of spiritual activity in those spaces. There's still a lot of electromagnetic energy in those spaces. You still have vortex in those areas. So you got these children who are sensitive to that. But sometimes, and again, like I said, a lot of times it's children who are mentally handicapped or physically handicapped. They get pulled into those spaces because, of course, they have the ability to see those angles. They have the ability to see those different refractions because they don't see the world head on like you or I may. You know, even having a physical handicap. I don't know if any of you have ever been like bedridden, you know, for a disproportionate amount of time, but even that changes your perspective. That changes having to lay horizontal. You know, I've been bedridden for a while, some years back. Changes your whole perspective on life. Just if you got to lay in the bed for 3-4 days and can't sit up, can't walk, you know, things like that. So, yeah, that's kind of my perspective on it. I know it's kind of a broad perspective, but, you know, you ask my opinion. I think in some instances, people are getting kidnapped by the Vatican. I think in other instances, people are getting kidnapped by perverted mountain men. And I think in most instances, because most instances reflect the other kind of phenomenon that I'm speaking about, I think these youth and these people are going into different dimensions, you know, because of, and I really am validating that by the way they're typically found, you know, and again, when it's the children being found 10, 15 miles from where you were, but no type of report of this person grabbed me. No, you're just walking. And you have no shoes. A lot of times that's impossible, you know? So, yeah, that would be my take on that. NC, I think that's the initials that I gave you. All right? But we're going to get into a little bit more of what we're talking about for this segment. And what I just spoke about was related. That's one of the reasons why I gave that question so much time, right? So, how to live an Anu life, or what is an Anu life? How to live an African life. And I defined African in my book, Grasping the Root of Divine Power. If you don't have it, go get it. If you're not in Anu spiritual training, go join. You know, a lot of these things can be answered for you, you know, in terms of some of the questions that you may have. Maybe not the one about abductions in national parks, because that was kind of left field, but fun to answer, sharing, you know, my perspective on it. And I have done some research on it, but I mean, I haven't gone to these parks with a flashlight and, you know, so I consider, you know, the more integrated research to be more in depth. But yeah, I actually have researched it because I was very curious at one point about all these different reports of alien abduction. And, excuse me, I just wasn't buying it. I just wasn't buying it. So I wanted to just get more reports. And a lot of people were saying they were getting caught up in these national parks. And I think what's tough is that when you don't first define the nature and the concept of an alien, I mean, I think that has to be your first start. And then after you define the nature and the concept of an alien, what does it mean to be caught up, right? Because when we look at, let's say, Ezekiel, right? If anybody has ever read that towards more the end of the Old Testament, and it talks about Ezekiel being caught up with God and Ezekiel seeing a will inside of a will. You know, I always saw that when I read it as a shuttle. That was a space shuttle. Not necessarily a spaceship, but it was a shuttle, you know, and he was caught up, right? So we have a phenomenon when we're talking about the Anu, or living an Anu life. Now, what I was saying earlier about the iTunes broadcast, initially this wasn't enlightenment and transformation. It was ancient indigenous sciences applied today. And I just felt like, you know, it was a little too long of a URL to have to give out all the time. Enlightenment and transformation is long. But I was like, that's as short as I can go. You know, if not that, it would be like light and dark or something like that, you know, which probably could have worked too. But so this concept of ancient indigenous sciences applied today really represents our relevancy today. Okay, and it's something I wanted to kind of speak on in terms of the Anu perspective, and certainly may elucidate some of the angles that I take sometimes when I'm teaching or when I'm presenting a class, right? So there's a phenomenon that exists. I think thinking about this recently in terms of how we perceive our spiritual rituals and how we perceive the deities that we work with and the techniques that we use. Sometimes we don't look at the updating of techniques or even really scrutinizing why we're using certain techniques. Like what is are they actually effective? What's the purpose? Who are we speaking to? And I think it's important sometimes to look at some of the reasons why we hold certain people and certain techniques above others, right? So I was thinking about, when brother asked about, that's one of the reasons I wanted to answer it on here, when he was asking about the abduction piece and this and that, and I know that a lot of times people relate it to aliens, and as soon as you start speaking about aliens, it gets a little funny, because especially for melanin dominant people, some of us will take offense to that, because we'll say, no, like especially when you talk about who built, some of the structures in ancient Kemet. Oh, the aliens did it. And you say, what? All that work our ancestors put in, and he's going to give it to aliens. So sometimes that can be a very touchy topic, but I am one who does acknowledge the existence of exalted ones. I mean, my name is Anu. Aliens is Alian. Ali means exalted. An means those from heaven or that other dimension. So the exalted ones from heaven are the aliens. Easy, right? That's real easy. I mean, call in an Orisha if you want. Call in an angel if you want. Those are the exalted ones from Orun, or the Orumale, as we also call them in the Yoruba, right? So, but there's a concept here that I wanted to really address. And that concept and that thought revolves around the techniques that we utilize to become the principles and the concepts sustained by these exalted ones. And again, in some instances we call them Lawal, some instances we call them Orisha, some instances we call them Nectaru. We have many different names for those we consider to be the sustainers and the curators of ancient concepts, right? But in some societies, they're just called gods, right? And a lot of times that perception of what the God is, or the perception of what those exalted ones is a little twisted based on our current technological standpoint, right? So when I'm teaching and with the Anu material, I'm always trying to elucidate the techniques. I'm always trying to elucidate the rituals. This is why we do this. That we don't need to do anymore unless you feel like doing it. But really trying to get into things like that. And discussing the idea of rituals, discussing the idea of techniques is critical. It's important to me because you have a phenomenon that has been in existence for many years throughout the world. And the phenomenon is a cultist phenomenon by the name of cargo cults. I don't know if any of you may be familiar with it. If not, check it out. And a cargo cult is really simply, like there was a movie that came out years ago, The Gods Must Be Crazy. I don't know if you guys saw that, but that was a movie where out of an airplane, someone dropped a Coke bottle and there was someone who was on the ground who was indigenous. And this indigenous individual thought that it was something from the gods and it represented something, and it was a cult, but it was just a Coke bottle, you see. Well, cargo cults are similar. During war times, you had these societies that would live in the midst of two warring factions. And what would happen is that when those warring factions would airdrop supplies for the soldiers, the indigenous tribes who had never really been in contact with that level of civilization as well as that level of manufactured goods thought that these were gods these were gifts being dropped from the gods because those soldiers were doing something that represented the technology that allowed them to speak to the gods, right? So I'm going over this briefly, and you found this in New Guinea. It's very popular. It was extremely popular in the Melanesian islands. So what they would do was they would try to emulate what the soldiers did. So like when they saw them talking on their walkie-talkies, and they had their rifles, they found later that the indigenous people, they would take coconuts and carve them out, and they would turn them into radios, and they would speak to them on the radios, and then they would take straw and they would fashion them into rifles, and they would have these straw rifles and coconut radios. In fact, there was one report one time, one tribe out of wood made a whole life-size model replica of an airplane, you see, because they felt that doing these things would connect them to what they considered to be gods. And there were certain people, matter of fact, if you watch the movie Apocalypse Now, Marlon Brando, you know, it gets into this, but there were certain people here in the US who actually took advantage of this and started cults around that. And what they would do is they would promise this great return of prosperity and a golden age that will be ushered in by their ancestors if they followed these certain movements, you know. And these cult leaders would always be the Eshu or the gatekeeper in order to bring these things about, right? So this was a very, very, very intense phenomenon for a long time in certain places. Like I said, Papua New Guinea. There were some of the outlying islands, and even when the Spanish came, to this place for the first time, there was some of that cargo cultism that was happening. You know, people were worshipped; they were seen as deities, because at that time, not knowing the technology associated, they would immediately associate these people as messengers of the gods, right? So once we mature in our civilization, and once we mature in our technological understanding, then we're able now to look at some of the tools and the things that we do and say, okay, if this is emulating something else that the deities do, am I emulating something at a primitive level that I no longer need to? Or can I now upgrade my technology? You see, so that's why ancient indigenous technology applied today was my old show header, because it was really looking at the ancient indigenous ways that we hold on to with a passion, but really looking at how do we apply them today. And if they can't be, like, you can't take a coconut radio and talk to anyone. It's not going to work. You can't fly an airplane made of thatch wood. You know, you can't shoot a rifle made of straw. There's nothing in it, because these are just replicas. So in the same instance, when we have certain cosmic principles, like our Orisha, like our Necharu, you know, like our angels, sometimes we have to look at the techniques that we're actually using and determine if we're like those uneducated natives, and I'm just saying educated in the arts of what is dropping out of the sky. If we're like those natives who are doing things that are completely ineffective because we've been mesmerized and beguiled by something that was nothing but, to another people, simple technology. You know, so learning the spiritual technology becomes necessary in that sense, so that way we can learn the proper pathways of how we contact and get to the energies that we want to get to. You see, so even when we speak about the alien abduction, a lot of times, or we read Ezekiel, we read about he was caught up, you know, with God, and he saw a wheel inside a wheel and a cherubim. I mean, I remember reading one passage once in the Bible, and it was talking about giant locusts with the faces of men. As soon as I read it, I said, oh, that was a helicopter. You know, the helicopter has a glass front, and you could see the people sitting inside of it. But at that time, if you've never seen a helicopter, because it hasn't been invented yet, but you're having a vision, and remember, in that other realm, in the astral planes, there's no sense of time. So 2016, 17, 18 is the same thing as 16, 17, 18. You know, so you may see images and not know how to properly interpret them, and you judge them based on your current linear perspective of what life is and what life is presented. And anything beyond that becomes divine, or becomes what we call supernatural, only because we don't really understand what it is. You see, if you could go to certain places on the planet and drop a piece of plastic, Just drop it out of a plane, a piece of plastic. And there may be huge discussions around this. What is this thing? It doesn't burn like wood. It doesn't make sparks like stone. It's not like our metals. What is this? It must be something from the God, and we may put it in a temple, and spend years upon years trying to decipher its mysteries. And it's no big mystery. It's not that deep. So a lot of times with our spirituality, the sad thing is that we create different deities for things that we can't cope with. And then we put the stamp of mystery on it. And a lot of times, even when people are trying to promote and push what it is that they're doing on their platform, the first thing they'll give to you is learn the mysteries of Tantra, learn the mysteries of yoga, get initiated to Yuya, and Yuya will unlock her mysteries to you. Well, often it's not a mystery, but it's just something that intellectually we haven't been cultivated in our societal structure. So intellectually we can't cope with it. So we just put a stamp of mystery on it, you see? And often our deities are nothing but things that we don't understand, things that are happening in nature that we just don't get yet. So we humanize it, we put a face on it, and then we say, well, you got to get initiated to understand the mysteries. But the person initiating you, they may know some things about it, but they may not. I give you a simple one, which I've used before. People initiated to Oshun, or say that Oshun is my mother. I love Oshun so much. And I'll do this all the time. I say, okay, what's water? What do you mean, what's water? What is what we drink? No, what is it though? Like, chemically, what is it? What is it made up of? And, hydrogen, oxygen. Okay, what's that? What's hydrogen? What's oxygen? Why does water move the way it does? Why is water wet? Why is it when we look at it in certain bodies of water, it's green? Sometimes it's like blue, sometimes it's purple, sometimes it's, but if you hold it up close, it's always clear. Why is that? Often you'll get, I don't know. You ain't no daughter of Oshun, get out of here. I'm messing with you, but those are the things that we should know if we want to upgrade our spiritual status. If we want to, you really want to become these archetypes and deities that you're worshiping so much, and you're establishing temples around. And that the term temple only means the places where the gods are. That's all, temple. So let's say, for instance, here we go. Here's an easy one, because people do this all the time when they go to the continent. They go with their little U.S. money, and that's why you get a lot of Mputohins, which is like chiefs of development. They go over there and they start spending money, and it's through their spending of money that they establish notoriety. Some societies are like that. The more gifts they give, now the society becomes indebted to them, and then they become chiefs and whatnot just because they were able to give gifts. But you could go to certain places on the continent with $500 US or 300 pounds and become a chief. Now people will look at you like they will attach all of this mysticism to all of this wealth, quote unquote, that you've been able to bring, without understanding that $500, like your plane ticket, was probably 3 times that. That's nothing. But it's in that society, it becomes this great thing if they don't really understand the production of wealth. They don't really understand what that paper money is, or how US dollars come into being, or how the British pound comes into being, and how much one really, and what really constitutes a lot of money or a little bit of money. But let's say if you do something like that, you become a big person. I see people do it all the time. You'll have enough money to maybe have servants and to build a home, or maybe even a palace. So you'll want things set up a certain way, so that way whenever you come over, things accommodate you the way you like it. And you've been able to do that by the mystification of trinkets, right? So your home, in essence, there becomes a temple. Now you may only visit once every 10 years because you're busy doing other things. But when you come down to visit, everyone dances and celebrates. Because not only do they know that they're going to get gifts, but they feel like the maintenance of that temple or the maintenance of that home or that palace is what makes you want to come there. So you think about it in the same instance of a temple. Now let's say if some of these archetypes that you're looking at, let's say some of them were cosmic archetypes, but some of them were actually just visitors from other dimensions. And you establish a temple. Well, why would you establish a temple? Because that's where the deities and man meet, based on the definition of temple. They may not just kick it in the park with you. They may not just play basketball with you. They say, when I come, this is where I'm going to be. Just like sometimes when we travel, and we may go to certain countries that are impoverished, but when I go, I want to see a Marriott or a Hilton. I'm not staying in a local guest house, right? In that sense, you become like a deity. And that place is always maintained and waiting for your arrival. You see? So in the same instance, sometimes we treat cosmic archetypes the same way. We establish these cargo cults around them. And we don't understand that those are just travelers traveling through. That's it. And some of the technologies they brought to us are technologies that we have now matured to figure out. You know, how does Oya manipulate storms? You see? How does Shango manipulate the thunder? You know, how does Yemoja heal with salt water? You know, I mean, these are topics and concepts now that we can dig into from a more scientific perspective, and we need to attack our spirituality with a scientific level of scholarship. And some things we'll be able to figure out, some things we haven't matured to yet. But you always want to push the limit to your place of maturing, and you're only going to know where you mature to by actually looking at it from that perspective. But if you continue to deify everything and mystify everything, then you'll never come back into that place of the exalted ones. As Anu, those of you who have joined and are part of the Anu family and the Anu ministry, you've acknowledged and you've accepted that, yeah, I'm a fallen elder. So as a fallen elder, I'm maturing back into my original status. So as each age transitions, there's a change. And as things change, I gain more access to my real technology. So what once was mystical and mystified me and beguiled me, I now have the ability to dissect and understand at a level that I didn't 200, 300, 400 years ago. So I don't have to deify it now. You know, like when we look at astronomy, we look at solar constellations or star constellations, we're looking at the physiology of the galaxy. So we're basically looking at the anatomy of the universe, its body. Now we understand that we're looking at its body, right? And we understand that we're a projection because matter just continues to extend outwards. Then we don't have to mystify and say, well, that constellation is the god so-and-so or the goddess so-and-so. We just say, okay, I'm looking at the universe's liver. I'm looking at the universe's pancreas. I'm looking at the universe's gallbladder, the same way I have it inside of me. And I don't need to deify those functions within me, because the more I deify them and mystify them, the less I have real access to their truths, to the best solutions that they have to give to me, because I'm not treating them right. It's like you ever travel and you're somewhere and you're trying to make a connection with locals, but they're just spending too much time cooning. Yes, boss. All right, boss, no problem. It's like, no, I'm trying to make a real connection, man. Knock it off. You know, you just can't get that connection, you know. In that sense, you begin to lose your use for them. You know, so it's the same thing when we're approaching deities in the same way. And they're like, look, man, I'm just the universe's janitor. It's really not that deep, man. Like, I'll show you how to do something. Because at some point I want to do something else, and you can help to transform me if you would stop spending so much time, you know, abased to me, you know. So the Anu perspective is about cutting into that, cutting into the rituals. Why do we use that food? Why do we use osu? Why do we use so much rum? Why do we use so much gin? You know, Are we emulating something that we once saw our ancient travelers do? But we're emulating it on our base human level. You know, we can't make a spaceship, but we can meditate, or we can make a frisbee and say, "I give this frisbee to the spirit of wind," and that's our way of trying to pull down that energy. You know, we can light a candle, but can we light lightning? And we may say, "Man, I haven't figured out how to make lightning yet." Even though I do know at certain times if I walk on my carpet and stuff, sparks will come from my hand, you know, and I can see them light up at night. Maybe I should really figure out how to really work on that a little bit more. Or I could just light this fire, this candle with a matchbook, you know. It's a little primitive, but have we grown beyond that at this point? Have we grown beyond some of the base primal movements of our rituals? Can we look at ourselves now like those natives who were making rifles out of straw, trying to call back the soldiers to come back down and to bring more gifts from the sky? People move on. Even your deities will move on. If you refuse to see them, they'll go to where someone does see them. Well, that has been our Chief Speaks for this Sunday. And I want to thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you sign up for our classes that are coming up. Of course, we know we have crystals coming up. That particular class, very interesting based on what we've been talking about. And we're going to get even deeper in our next segment. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the Anu mind and the Anu perspective. And again, like I said, if you're not a part of what we're doing, become a part of it. You know, this is not a religion, not a religion. In fact, what we're doing is dismantling religions, because religare is to bind yourself back, or religion, to bind yourself back. It also means to reread. You know, we read enough. It's time to start doing some stuff. You know, we read all the books, and binding ourselves back again to movements and motions that have us looking like, you know, natives with coconuts trying to talk to someone 3 miles away. It's time to step this thing up, man. It's time to step it up, you know, and it's time to look at the things that are accessible to us and use them. I'll give you one thing before I leave, and I've said this so many times. Well, not so many times, to myself, and I shared it recently. One of the reasons I don't go to Bimbays as much anymore, we were talking about that recently, or events and stuff. Now, just to give you some background, I drum, and my father's a drummer, my brother's a drummer, my uncle's a drummer. I grew up in a drummer's house, okay? My cousin is one of the top drummers, well, they say he is the top drummer on the East Coast, you know. So drums, that's what we do. And of course, I'm also a musician. I play several different instruments. I compose, boom, go through the whole thing. So music is my thing. But I said years ago that I'm tired of singing the same songs. And why can't we have a DJ up in here? You know, Bimbay should have DJs now. Yeah, you can have, and it would be cool. You can have the djembe orchestra, put a bass player in there, keyboard player, and a DJ. Why not? It doesn't violate anything. You know, we're still stuck playing with the coconuts. And not realizing that the technology has advanced to a certain place, we can do other things. Hey, you know what you could do aside from lighting a candle? Just leave your cell phone light on. It's electric, right? So that means there's fire inside of it, right? So what's the difference? I know it feels like blasphemy. I know it does. I know it does. But we'll get deeper into it. Some of you may be ready for it. Some of you may not. And we got something for both of you. Don't worry. But eventually, you're going to have to accept that it's a new era. It's a new time. And we have new tools and new possibilities open to us so that we can get back home. You don't have to keep doing the same thing over and over, especially if it doesn't resonate with you. You don't have to. It's not going to work anyway. But anyway, thank you all for listening. My name is Chief Yuya. And like I said, I invite you to be a part of this ministry, to join our new spiritual training. And every last Friday to call in 347. Just call in. I know the last number. See, I haven't been off it for a while. 347-948-7680, something like that. But it'll be in the description on this video. I haven't done a live call-ins in so long myself. I forgot the number. But yeah, so I invite you every last Sunday, every fourth Sunday. The students do an open panel. You can call in. All our new spiritual training students, you're invited to be a part of that panel and share your perspectives and share some of your growth and maybe even some of your obstacles. It's all good. We're all working through it. Myself as well. I'm on the same path. Trust me. I'm on it. It's a little further out there, but I'm on it. I'm on it. So I went over some of the bumps and trust me, the bumps are bigger further down the path. The obstacles are much bigger. But once you get your Hercules on, you can throw those boulders out of the path. All right, until such time, I thank you so much for tuning in, and have a safe day today, and have a prosperous one, and think about what we spoke about. Peace.